We just can't vote on anything.
I know. It's like no meeting.
Good evening. The time is now 5:31, and I'm calling the work session of the Board of Education for Battle Creek Public Schools to order. Today is Monday, July 14th, 2025. Secretary, please call the roll.
Ryan Hoagland Jackson.
Here.
Felicia Norman. Art McClinney.
Present.
Dr. Alicia Johnson. Nathan Graycheck. Dr. Nicole Perry. Charlie Fulbright.
Here. As a reminder, tonight's meeting is being interpreted into Spanish, thanks to our partners from Voces Battle Creek. To listen in Spanish, please refer to the description on our YouTube live stream for the link. To our board members and other speakers, please remember to speak clearly and not too quickly so that our interpreters are able to keep up. Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda, and unfortunately we do not have a quorum, so we're going to bypass that one for now and move to public comments. The BCPS Board of Education recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of allowing members of the community to express themselves on district matters. We have two opportunities tonight on our agenda for public comments. The Board of Education requests you fill out a public participation form with contact information. As you come up to the microphone, please state your name. Each statement made by a speaker shall be limited to a 3-minute duration, and if the speaker represents a group, the person will be given 5 minutes to speak. BCPS Board of Education will listen, take comments and questions under advisement, and not respond at this time. Public commenters will direct all comments to the Board of Education and not to staff or other participants. Do we have any public comments? Thank you. Moving on to reports and recommendations. A, BCCHS Cafe Overhead Door. Michelle Morrissey.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So at the cafeteria, we have specific fire rated the up and down cafeteria doors. One of them needs to be completely replaced, and it is a special fire door, so it's got to be a certain type. So that is what this bid is for. It's a total of $20,942. That's replacing the door, all the installation, the electrical of the door, complete. That's that. No, that is a door that's been original since the remodel, which was what, 16 years ago? So I'm sure I'll have a couple more that will need to be replaced as we move along on that. And that was with overhead door replacement. And then my second, can I go ahead and move on to the second one?
Do we have any questions?
Any questions? Sorry.
Yes, go on.
Okay, and then my second request is for Northwestern Visual and Performance Art School. After seeing the beautiful building and you walk into the kitchen, it was like, oh. So we did have that cafeteria painted, and both of these are coming from the food service excess fund balance to replace all the old serving lines. Again, those are just as probably a little bit older than the remodel. To have all those serving lines replaced, and very similar to the solid surface that we have at the high school. And that's going through Douglas food service equipment, and complete to have the both serving lines completely redone. And then that also includes a walk-in cooler, walk-in freezer in the back portion of the that building. With the anticipated enrollment, we need more cooler and freezer space. And that total project comes in at $244,651.29. Again, this all comes out of the food service excess fund balance. Any questions?
I love that when you come up here, there's always a food excess fund balance. I want you to be my.
Yeah, I'm just
Come to my
waiting
house.
so that one year I'm going to go, oh, I don't have one.
Then I'll have questions.
I have two more projects that we're kind of working on, but unfortunately, that was Verona and Franklin. Those have to be subsided right now because of the programs going on during the summer. But those will be our last two buildings that we need to refurbish and food service wise. So, all right.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Okay, moving on to C, Dudley Early Childhood Center Play Area Surfacing Project. Josh Bowman.
I love how Michelle always makes more work for me.
He's here for you.
Right. No, you don't have to pay for it though.
So the recommendation you'll see in your packet now is to repurpose a 3,000 square foot portion of the current 5,000 square foot Dudley courtyard to include a rubberized surface and a shade to enhance the safety of the outdoor space and also be compliant with new child care licensing restrictions. The shade itself is a 20-year product. The fabric on the shade is a 10-year product. And the poured in place rubber ranges anywhere between 10 and 15 years, similar to what you'd get with a synthetic turf field. So life cycles are good, maintenance is low. Any questions on that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, moving on to D, School Wellness Contract. Dr. Cheeks.
They got their money.
Dr. Blue.
I know.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I have for you the school wellness, otherwise known as the Calhoun County Public Health Department contract for the school wellness nursing program. And so this contract that I am proposing is going to cover nursing staff in all 6 of our elementary only buildings. So it does not include nursing staff in Northwestern, who also has elementary children, just our 6 elementaries that only service between K and 5. The contract is for a total amount of $557,388,000. And the school wellness program has been with our school district as long as I've been here, so about 13 school years. And what they offer is an oversight for medical staff in general. So we don't have staff within the school district who have medical oversight, who can administer immunizations and things like that. And so the program itself has the oversight of that. They also handle our training, any of our MERT, which is our medical emergency response training, and any other trainings, CPR, that are related to health and wellness within the school district. Sometimes it's not at a cost at all, and if it is, it's at a very minimal cost. And so we're proposing that they remain in each of our elementary buildings.
Any questions for Dr. T? Thank you so much. Moving on to you again, Police Liaison Contract.
And so this contract is for a police liaison, which is stationed at Battle Creek Central High School, but also offers advice and support throughout the school district. Our liaison officer, who is currently with us, is going on his 3rd school year with us, and this contract amount is for $101,661,000 for the 25-26 school year. It does not include the following summer. So you will see a decrease in that contract amount. The contract amount last year was more because it encompassed an entire school year, including the summer.
Any questions?
Why not the summer?
Funding for the most part, and this year, the year that we included summer was so that we could do a lot of programming with a lot of wellness checks that were needed throughout the summer. We did some walks for students that hadn't been consistent in attending, so there was an intentional purpose for the liaison officer to be there. He also was a part of the trainings that we hosted that summer as well. So this summer that we're rolling into did not require as much of that attention.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on to F, Fenton Communications Support. Jose.
Good afternoon, Board Trustees. So as recommended in your board packet, I am proposing we continue our partnership with Fenton Communications just through November of this year. After 8 years of collaboration, this will be our final phase of work together. The work they've been doing is helping me with the most important campaigns, right? Campaigns that not just one single person can do. As you know, I'm a team of one, and so getting the help from Fenton is super, super helpful. What they will be doing in the next couple of months is making sure that the systems are in place for us to never really need outside help again in the communications department. The amount is $60,000 out of WKKF. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to G, Bullseye Instructional Support Platform. Dr. Harvey.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Great evening happening in public school. The Teaching and Learning Department recommends purchasing the platform Bullseye to help us streamline classroom walkthroughs, instructional coaching, and professional development that's aligned to our practice. Currently, we are using a lot of Google Forms, and that is causing a lot of time to be spent on data analysis, spreadsheets, summarizing findings, and really incoherent practices across buildings. And so what this platform gives us the opportunity to do is for all K-12 instructional leaders, not just administrators, but also instructional coaches, to use this platform to collect walkthrough feedback or walkthrough observation, to provide feedback and track the instructional progress. And so one of the things that we absolutely adored in the demo was being able to see trends across buildings that would then inform the professional learning that we need across the district. Just this past week, we had a bunch of users, meaning administrators and instructional coaches, look at the platform, and overwhelmingly all said this is something that we desperately need to improve our practice. So I'm asking the board to purchase or recommend the purchasing of Bullseye platform. It's set up to $50,000 because we were still getting a contract, but it's $3,000 per building, and so we would need licensure for each of our 10 buildings, so $30,000. To be paid from the WKKF grant. What questions do you have?
Thank you so much. Moving on. Oh, perfect timing. Next on our agenda.
Have the presentation up here?
They all have one.
Okay.
Have it on the.
Okay.
You want butter ready?
Yeah, butter would be great.
Yeah. I think we will take a quick 5-minute break to get settled in, and then we will resume.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay, moving on to discussion, letter A, the Open Meetings Act Workshop. Brad Banasek, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, and I think we got about an hour planned for this. So as we go through the information, don't hesitate to ask questions. Kind of build a little bit of time for questions. So you see what we have planned to cover tonight. Also, just want to bring your attention to my contact information. If you have any questions and you want to follow up with me by phone or my email address, please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to assist after tonight. So we're going to cover a lot, hopefully in an hour here. Starting out with key Open Meetings Act provisions and terms. In order to grasp the requirements of the Open Meetings Act requires an understanding of the terms that are built into the requirements. If you don't understand those terms, the definitions, the requirements don't mean much. So we'll get into those terms and definitions. And then from there, one of the bigger issues that I get questioned about, committee meetings, whether committees are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And in this context, we're talking about those committees that are less than a quorum of the board. So if you have a committee of 3, is that committee subject to the Open Meetings Act? I'm not sure if you guys use a committee of the whole process at all, but obviously your committee of the whole meetings are subject to OMA because it involves a quorum of the board. And then we'll cover some other meeting issues that come into play with the Open Meetings Act requirements, getting into why it's important to distinguish between decisions and deliberations, and then probably the area of the law that districts struggle with the most, closed meetings. When can you meet in a closed session under the Open Meetings Act? And then from there, meeting notices, special meetings, agendas, then we will finish up with public comment. What are the issues that come up with public comment? What are reasonable rules that you can adopt to facilitate public comment? What are some rules that may not be enforceable? And then we'll finish up with what are the enforcement and issues involved with the Open Meetings Act, and what are penalties when a public body does not comply with the act. So I like to start out every Open Meetings Act presentation with this slide. Gives you an idea of how courts interpret the Open Meetings Act. Courts are always going to interpret the Open Meetings Act in favor of transparency, in favor of openness. Open Meetings Act, along with FOIA, is a pro-open government law. So you see that last statement there with the burden on the public body on the applicability of an exception, meaning, when we look at those closed meeting exceptions, if you're ever in closed meeting and that's challenged, the burden of proof is on the school board or the public body to show that you were legitimately in closed session, and you have to interpret those closed meeting sessions very narrowly. And I'll give you some examples of that when we get to that portion in the outline. So some key provisions and the terms that I have highlighted, that's what we're going to be taking a deeper dive into. So 3 general provisions here, 3 general requirements that are significant under the Open Meetings Act. All meetings of a public body shall be open to the public. So two terms that we're going to take a look at there. What constitutes a meeting under the Open Meetings Act? When are you in a meeting? And if you're in a meeting as a public body, then you're subject to the Open Meetings Act. Now, public body, for the purposes of a school board, clearly the school board is a public body, but we'll take a look at that issue, whether your committees could be a public body as defined under the Open Meetings Act. Any deliberations of a public body that involve a quorum of the board must take place at a meeting open to the public, unless otherwise specified in the Act, meaning whether a closed meeting exception applies under those circumstances. And then all decisions of a public body must be made in an open meeting. So distinguishing between deliberations and decisions, not that important when you're in open session, right? But when you're in closed session, it becomes significant because you can't make a decision in closed session. And sometimes while boards think they're deliberating in closed session, they're actually making a decision in closed session, and that violates the Open Meetings Act. So we'll cover some examples of that when we get to that area in the outline. Here's the definition of a public body. You see, very broad, and a school board meets the first kind of natural definition here. School board is a local governing body that's been empowered by the legislature through the revised school code to act for the school district. And then, so as articulated by our Supreme Court, that's one way an entity satisfies the definition of what constitutes a public body that makes that entity subject to the Open Meetings Act. Another way is that a public body delegating its authority to another entity, making that entity a public body. And that's how a school board committee can be a public body when it's less than a quorum of the board. The board delegates authority to that committee. So is a committee a public body under the Open Meetings Act? Yes, as I indicated. If that committee is performing a governmental function on behalf of the public body. So a school board committee performing a governmental function on behalf of the school board. When that committee is authorized to act on matters that prevent those issues from reaching the full board, that committee is performing a governmental function, making it subject to OMA. Now, on the other hand, if a committee, again, less than a quorum, is just gathering information and then maybe recommending something to the full board, and the full board has the opportunity to make its own decision, so no decisions have been made at the committee level, then that committee will not necessarily be a public body, and then it can hold its meetings outside of the public eye. So when a committee is a public body, so that committee has been authorized by the board to perform a governmental function, all the OMA requirements apply. So that committee must post its meetings, and you're not posting a board meeting, you're posting a committee meeting, and that's significant in terms of whether other board members can show up for that meeting. We'll get to that issue in a bit. And then those committee meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act. You have to allow for public comment. And then if you make any decisions through that committee, they have to be done in open session. Then you're taking minutes for that committee meeting as well. So there's been a number of court cases on this issue, and a recent Michigan Supreme Court case that provides guidance. So these are, in a nutshell, the key takeaways from committee cases. So a true advisory committee that's not subject to the Open Meetings Act, that committee is gathering information and then maybe identifying a preferred option to the full board, but the board still has the ability to take into consideration all the options that were considered by the committee, and that board retains the authority to accept or reject the recommendations. So in that context, the committee is not making any decisions, making it subject to the Open Meetings Act. A committee will be subject to OMA if it engages in the practice of limiting or narrowing down the options. So the committee maybe used a scoring process at the committee level and eliminated options through that scoring process, and then only shared one or two options with the full board while not sharing the other options that were eliminated. In that case, the committee is making a decision and would be subject to the Open Meetings Act. And then another issue that the court has focused on is the board just simply rubber stamping that recommendation from the committee, and without any deliberations, without considering other options that were presented to the board through the committee. And then function is determinative, not title. What does that mean? It doesn't matter what you call your committees. You could call your committee an advisory committee, a review committee, but if it's acting on behalf of the board and it's making a decision, doesn't matter what the title is. It's what that committee is doing. It determines whether that committee is subject to the Open Meetings Act. So that's quickly covering committees. Any questions on committees before we move on to the next slide here? All right, so I mentioned if you are making your committees subject to the Open Meetings Act, so you're posting them as committee meetings, I get the question quite often. Well, we have board members that like to be involved in all board activities. So while they may not be a member of a committee, but they want to attend that committee regardless. And it's been posted as a committee meeting, so the board member says, well, I'm going to take my board member hat off and I want to attend this committee meeting like a member of the public, like anybody else. And I'm not going to participate in that meeting. that's okay that I can attend, right? Well, it's not. Still, that just the mere presence of that fourth board member turns that committee meeting into a board meeting. And if it's been posted as a committee meeting, that's going to violate the Open Meetings Act. So 2 options to address this issue. If you have a fourth board member that's going to show up, or maybe even a 5th or 6th board member, you just post that committee meeting as a special meeting. So if you post it as a special board meeting rather than as a committee meeting, that tells the public that the quorum of the board is going to be there. And it's a special meeting, not a committee meeting. Or if a committee member shows up unannounced, the committee chair should quickly recess the meeting and talk to that committee member saying that, you know, we're having a committee meeting here, your presence turns us into a special board meeting, and we can't do that without properly posting it. So we're either going to have to adjourn this meeting, or, you know, if you leave, we can continue after the recess. So those are 2 ways to address that particular issue when you have non-committee members showing up at committee meetings. So the definition and interpretation of a meeting. So you see that definition there. Convening of a public body, which a quorum is present. So convening of a school board, when the quorum of that board is present, and you're deliberating or making a decision relating to public policy. So the key point in that definition, it goes beyond making a decision. It covers deliberations too. So that's why anytime a quorum of the board is present together, you shouldn't be discussing any school district business. Even if you don't plan on making a decision, because if you're deliberating on school district business, there's a great likelihood that there's going to be a decision made at a later time on that matter by the full board, and thus that constitutes a meeting under the Open Meetings Act. So just beware that the definition of a meeting could cover those gatherings that involve discussion-only groups, like your workshops, study sessions, retreats. Even though you're not making any decisions at those discussion-only gatherings, they still constitute meeting under the Open Meetings Act. And another issue that comes into play here kind of goes the other way with, can you have a meeting when a quorum isn't physically present at one time, whether it be physical or virtually present? And yes, you can actually have a meeting contrary to the Open Meetings Act under those circumstances if your board is engaging in creating a constructive quorum or splintering the quorum. You know, that's when a gathering starts out as okay, with maybe 2 or 3 board members discussing an issue, but then it's shared with other members. And then it's continued to be shared with other members to the point where you now have a quorum of the board deliberating on a matter that the board is going to be acting on. So one example, this was a school board, we'll go nameless, what happened was employees requested to have a meeting with 3 board members to discuss personnel matters. So not a great idea to begin with. From a governance perspective, having staff members meet with board members outside the presence of the administration, but that's what happened here. And this meeting began with 3 board members, then a 4th board member showed up. Now, give credit to this board that they knew that this could constitute a violation of the Open Meetings Act, that they had 4 board members physically present at one time discussing school district matters with staff. So they told that 4th board member to go outside and wait for 15 minutes and then come back in, and then another board member will leave. So we're not going to have a quorum of the board present at any one time while we're discussing district issues with staff. They felt that was okay, but it wasn't. Someone reported that to the local prosecutor, and the prosecutor investigated and said, yes, this is a constructive quorum, and this meeting did violate the Open Meetings Act. Now, the board could have been criminally prosecuted, but the prosecutor determined that there wasn't intent to violate the Open Meetings Act under those circumstances. So while it was found to be a violation, the board members weren't prosecuted for intentionally violating the act. But that gives an example of how you could have a constructive quorum situation when you don't have a quorum at one time discussing a matter, if that information is shared with the 4th or 5th board member over time. So let's go the other way then. Situation when you can have quorum present of the board and it's not subject to the Open Meetings Act. Hello.
Yeah, you're calling now.
Never felt so needed.
So glad you're here.
I wasn't going to suggest any action during that. Well, after I'm done, you can.
Right, now we can act.
So, yeah, very, very timely now. We have, but, you know, the situation when a
She
quorum.
was sitting in the hall waiting to come in, that's what it was.
So gathering outside of a public meeting with a quorum, it is permitted under the Open Meetings Act, but under very narrow circumstances. So this first exception, we like to call them permissible gathering exceptions, I call the MASB exception. It allows a board to go to a conference, and it might be an MASB conference or some other organizational conference, and as long as you're discussing broad issues there that are not only specific to Battle Creek, but to other districts, and it's open to other board members, and while the quorum of the board is there, you're not deliberating as a quorum, you're just listening, that's not subject to the Open Meetings Act. So, and that happens quite frequently, where we have a quorum of a school board, you know, coming up to a spring institute, or maybe our fall ALC, and that's permitted under the Open Meetings Act. I got a phone call on April Fool's Day from one of the executive assistants, and thought it would be a good time to do an April Fool's Day joke. So she called me and she said, you know, quorum of the board is going up to Mackinac Island for your Spring Institute. I just want to know if there's any issues involved there. And I told the executive assistant a very serious matter. Well, to ensure that they don't violate the Open Meetings Act, you have to ride in the van with them all the way up to the island to make sure that they're in full compliance with the act. And I get this pause on the phone, like, what? And I said, April Fools, and you know, but told her the correct answer is they just can't they have to refrain from deliberating as a quorum of the board while they're in that van together riding up to the island, because it would fit into this exception. But she wasn't too excited about riding up with them to police whether they were going to comply with the Open Meeting Act.
Is that Kawita?
No. Yeah, the executive assistant I talked to, she tends to get a little frustrated with her board on occasion, so she wasn't too excited about making that trip. So she was happy that as an April Fool's Day joke. So some other permissible gatherings, social or chance gathering, that may be a holiday event where you get together as a board. Graduation, the commencement ceremony, that is a permissible gathering. You're not gathering for the purposes of school district business. You're there to recognize the graduating seniors, and while you're there as a quorum, you're not required to post that as a meeting. That is considered to be a social gathering under that permissible gathering exception. Presentations by groups. So your board could attend another municipal meeting, or maybe a 501c community group meeting, maybe a library board meeting if they have an issue that involves the school district. And you wouldn't have to post it as a meeting for your school board under the Open Meetings Act, as long as you're just listening to those presentations and not deliberating as a quorum of the board. And then lastly, political matters. This actually came up frequently in the last election, where you had in some communities slates of board members running as a team, and then maybe you had 4 board members who were up for election, 4 incumbent board members who were up for election, and they were going to run together as a slate against 4 board members who were running against them to try to overturn the board. Those 4 board members who were incumbent board members could gather together and strategize on election issues, how to get reelected, and that would not be subject to the Open Meetings Act. It falls within that that political matters exception. So those are permissible gatherings. Any questions on those before we move on to emails or texts? All right, let's take a look at that issue. So virtual communications, can virtual communications, electronic communications violate the Open Meetings Act? Yes. Again, you look at that definition of a meeting. If you have a quorum of the board deliberating by emails or by text, that is going to constitute a violation of OMA. One-on-one communications between board members have always been fine. Okay, that goes back before we had email and texting. Two board members could have a conversation with one another, whether by phone or in person, and that's never been an issue. So as long as a text between two board members stays between two board members, or an email between two board members stays between those two board members, should be fine. That shouldn't raise any concern under OMA. However, if it's shared and then you copy other board members on those emails, you could get to the point where you have a quorum of the board deliberating, and then that's problematic under OMA. Open Meetings Act doesn't prohibit one-way communications either. I know your executive assistant likely sends out one-way communications to the board, or Charlie, you may send out a one-way communication to the 6 other board members, and that's fine. It's just that if someone responds to that, they should respond to you directly, not copying the other board members. And we'll get into some best practices with texting and email in a bit, but before doing that, I wanted to discuss this case. It took a while before we got a case that addressed the issue of board members emailing each other, and whether that is a violation of the Open Meetings Act when it involves a quorum of the board. And this case decided that issue. It was kind of a unique situation where you had 4 long-standing commissioners and then 3 newly commissioners that were elected to this commission. And at the initial meetings after the election, it was the 3 new commissioners that were doing all the deliberating and talking during the meetings. The 4 commissioners that had been there a long time just simply voted and sat silently through most of the meeting. And the new commissioners were puzzled by that, and they found out that these commissioners were exchanging emails prior to meetings, and they were doing their deliberations by email. And like, well, how are you going to vote on this one, and how are you going to vote on that motion? It was all done by emails, and they thought they were okay because what they were doing, it was just 3 of them going back and forth, and a 4th was just being copied on those emails. And because of that practice, well, only 3 members are deliberating. That 4th member isn't deliberating. He's just seeing how we're going to vote. Just simply receiving the emails without responding to them. So they felt they were okay, but the Court of Appeals disagreed with that, found that those deliberations violated OMA, and set this rule: whether a quorum is present for the purpose of deliberating toward a decision, when only some members in the email respond to a message, is often a question of fact. And in this case, looked at the facts of the situation and said clearly that 4th board member, while not responding to emails, was in tacit agreement with how those 3 other board members were going to vote, did not object to receiving those emails, and consistently voted with those 3 other board members as well. So found that to be a violation of the Open Meetings Act, and this is the case that I guess I point to as authority to the issue of that 4th board member attending a committee meeting and not engaging in the deliberations, and it still being a meeting, a board meeting rather than a committee meeting, because this case says not all the quorum of the board has to be deliberating. You could have 3 people deliberating and that 4th person just listening, and that still constitutes deliberations by the board. And in this case, it was emails, 3 board members deliberating by email and copying a 4th. That constituted, according to the court, a quorum of the board deliberating, and because the court found that, it violated the Open Meetings Act. So some best practices, do's and don'ts with email practices. Always avoid the reply all button. Avoid these sequential communications. That would create the constructive quorum or splintering the quorum an email starts out innocently between two board members and then is shared with other board members. Then you can have a quorum of the board. Consider using blind copies. Again, if the president sends out a communication to the entire board, maybe send it to everyone by blind copy. That way, if someone hits reply all, it's only going to go back to the president. It won't go to the 6 other board members. So that is a good practice. It's not a fail-safe practice. If you had multiple emails going back and forth between two board members and those board members were blind copying the board on those messages, I think at that point you're likely going to get a quorum of the board deliberating, even though you're using blind copies. And then a board member alert is a good idea as well, just reminding your colleagues that the email is not for interactive discussion, and whoever receives this shouldn't forward it and shouldn't reply to other members because of the risk of violating the Open Meetings Act. So texting during board meetings, we'll cover this issue and then I'll open it up for questions if there are any questions on electronic communications. This is guidance from the Attorney General. So not a published opinion, but the Attorney General, kind of an advisory in the AG's Open Meetings Act handbook, that any form of texting during a meeting to another board member likely violates the Open Meetings Act. So I always thought it would have to be a quorum, texting during a meeting, because it's always been a practice for board members to maybe pass notes during a meeting, and that's never been a violation. And I don't see a difference between a board member passing a note to another board member, or sending a text electronically. So based on the guidance of the AG here, I would advise against any type of note passing during a meeting. Anything that you have to say as a board member, should not be expressed secretly through an electronic means, whether it be via texting or emailing, or even by physical means of writing a note to a board member. If you have something to share at a board meeting with another board member, it should be done openly and transparently. So I think that's the purpose of this guidance from the AG. And then Open Meetings Act and social media. I know a lot of board members kind of use social media as a platform for their school district or school board position. Board members need to be careful in that area, particularly if they have other board members who are connected to that social media site. And if you have dialogue on the social networking page that amounts to a quorum of the board deliberating outside of a meeting, clearly that's going to be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So the best practice here, don't use social media for school board purposes. Let the school district, if the board has a social media page, let that page update the community on the ongoing business of the board and the school district, rather than doing it as an individual board member. So any questions on texting, emailing, and issues in that regard under the Open Meetings Act?
Sure.
Yes?
So I had another training, and it kind of just hit what you said, because I was kind of confused. So my first question, so if we take the district's media message and put it on our page,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's comments, as long as we're using the post from the district just to spread the word, and if conversation starts, are you saying that's?
I would say that's okay. So it looks like your question is in the context of the court case, which found that addressed the issue of a board member using social media and then maybe blocking a person or censoring their comments on social media, and whether you're engaging in a governmental action in doing that as a board member. And how the Supreme Court ruled on that case is the example you gave. If you took information from the school district social media page and just simply shared it on your page, you're not engaging in any governmental action. You don't have any special authority to do that as a board member. So if you did that, and then someone from the community gave you some pushback or said some things that were not appropriate, and you deleted those comments, you would not be violating their First Amendment rights in that context.
Or if you push back yourself.
Yeah. So, but so let's say you did post something from the school district social media page, and then 3 other board members get on your social media page and start talking about that decision and how maybe it should be changed by the board at a later date. You're deliberating as a quorum, and that would be problematic. But from a First Amendment perspective, the example you gave, and that may be the point that was being made in that training, if you're just sharing information, you're not engaging in a governmental action. And then you can delete comments, you could censor comments, you could block people, and then it's not going to be an issue.
Okay, that's the same page. Go ahead, I have one more.
No, go ahead. How about you?
And then going back to your email. Email concerns me. I've had 3 trainings. So
Yeah.
I'm going back to your example.
Yeah.
President emails this statement or question
Mm-hmm.
to 6 or 7 of us.
Mm-hmm.
We respond to him individually.
Yeah.
But doing that, I decide to respond to my colleague, she responds to me, and she responds to him. This is one-on-one, and
Yeah.
I respond to him. Would you say that's a quorum, and you've started a quorum, and then we all say, then we get back and contact Charlie,
Yeah.
and we come up with a different decision. Wouldn't you say that?
Well, if it's just the 3 of you,
No, if it could, it's only 3 of us sitting
Yeah,
here.
uh-huh.
I'm just saying, if
Yeah.
the whole board.
oh yeah, if they start going individually and then that is shared, I would say, again, it's hard to determine how a court would view that, but I think they would likely find that constitutes deliberations by a quorum of the board. One-on-one communications is always the best practice.
Yeah, one-on-one, I get
And not sharing those one-on-one communications with other board members. Just keeping them, for your purpose. And then if anything needs to be shared, then it's shared at a public meeting, out in the open, rather than sharing it electronically with a quorum of the board. But yeah, I think it's okay. So if you get something from Charlie and then you email Dr. Johnson and it's just you and Dr. Johnson back and forth with communications, that's fine. But if you were to expand what the both of you talked about with other board members, by sharing those emails, that's when it becomes problematic.
Or the conversation.
Pardon?
Or the
The
conversation.
conversation, yes. Yeah. The best practice is just one-on-one communications need to stay at one-on-one communications if you're able to do that. And that's why picking up the phone and calling somebody is or not picking up the phone anymore, but using your cell phone and calling somebody is always the best practice. Yes.
So we've talked a lot about like when not to use it, and I think because of that, sometimes I'm just like playing it safe. I don't never send to everybody.
Sure.
But when is it appropriate for us to send something to everyone or engage in a dialogue?
Electronically as a
yeah,
board?
electronically. Is there ever
I would
a
say it
time-
really is never appropriate to engage as a quorum of the board through electronic means. I get the question quite often, can we use a Google document? Let's say we want to come up with a statement from the board and we're going to put on a Google document. Each board member is going to share their thoughts on that Google document, and then whatever we come up with, that's what we're going to use. And I think that's even problematic. I don't like using a Google documents, whether it's for that purpose or coming up with a policy on a certain matter, because those individual comments and changes to that document that you can see as another board member that your colleague is making on that document, to me, amounts to deliberations outside of a public meeting. And the Open Meetings Act hasn't kept up with technology. Maybe at some point there will be some exceptions to some of these issues written into the act that provide maybe for more electronic communications outside of a meeting, but as of today, no, that just you have to be careful. Anytime you're engaging in electronic communication and it involves more than 3 board members. All right, decision. So we talked about the importance of the term decision. How is that defined? Equates to any type of decision making made in a board meeting, and it could involve a consensus building process as well. So if you're kind of building a consensus by electronic communications and making a decision outside of a meeting via that way, that's going to violate the Open Meetings Act. But what you can do is canvass other individual board members. This may seem a little counterintuitive that this is compatible with the Open Meetings Act, but yeah, the court has affirmed this. So if if you have a significant issue that's pending before your board and you're wondering how each board member is going to vote on that issue, you can see where each board member stands in contacting them before the meeting and even try to persuade them one way or the other outside of a meeting. Again, as long as that stays on a one-on-one basis, that's the key. So canvassing is permissible, but just keeping it at one-on-one. If it goes beyond that, then courts have questioned the practice. Yes?
If I'm understanding correctly, regardless of what you're communicating about, where it crosses the line is if you say, oh, I had this conversation with this other board member and now we're talking about it too.
Yeah, okay if it's shared with a third board member, but once it goes beyond that third board member to a quorum of the board, that's when it becomes problematic. And another example of splintering the quorum is when maybe 2 board members are meet with individual board members. Okay, so maybe the vice president and president meet with trustee A, and then the same individuals meet with trustee B, and then meet with trustee C. None of those meetings involve a quorum of the board, but information is shared amongst those 3 board members at each meeting to the point where you're creating a constructive quorum by having those 3 separate mini meetings. And then whether it be in closed session or in open session, having a secret vote violates the Open Meetings Act. Votes should always be taken in a way where someone attending the meeting or reading the minutes can hear or see how each board member voted. This is based on a Court of Appeals case that has interpreted the Open Meetings Act. So anytime you use a ranking process, let's say you have a vacancy on the board and you have 15 applicants for that vacancy and you interview 8 of those and you want to narrow the pool of 8 down to 3 finalists. And the way you do that is you rank those 8 candidates that were interviewed and then you tabulate those rankings and maybe come up with 3 finalists. Those rankings constitute a decision. So how each board member ranked those 8 candidates, that would have to be publicly announced at a board meeting, and then also that would have to be recorded in the minutes as well in order to be a legitimate act by the board in narrowing the pool from 8 to 3 candidates. As I mentioned, important to distinguish between deliberations and decisions while you're in closed session, because you can't make any decision in closed session. There's one limited exception, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but 99% of the time when you're in closed session, you can't make a decision as a school board, and even kind of trying to build a consensus through a formal process could be making a decision in closed session. So, someone saying, well, we should all be on the same page on this issue. Just a show of hands, how are you going to vote when we come back out into open session? That would be crossing the line. That would be making a decision in closed session. This is the only exception. Okay? It relates to while you're in closed session for negotiation, bargaining purposes. So Section 8C allows you to go into closed session to discuss strategy relating to bargaining a collective bargaining agreement. And while you're in closed session for strategy purposes, you can vote as a board on bargaining objectives. okay? Giving directives to your chief negotiator, you know, as far as where to draw the line on particular issues that are going to come up during negotiations. That's not a final decision as defined under the Open Meetings Act. There still has to be bargaining after the board adopts its bargaining objectives. So that was based on a court case. That is the very limited exception that allows you to kind of come to a consensus in closed session, you know, only when you're looking at bargaining objectives. So let's get into closed meetings. And I'd like to introduce this topic by looking at the top 5 closed meeting violations that I've seen among not just school boards, but all public bodies in Michigan. Exceeding the scope of the closed session, that's when you're legitimately in closed session, you have closed session creep. All right, so you're talking about a matter covered by one of the reasons that we're going to take a look at in a minute, but then discussions go beyond that legitimate closed meeting exception, and you're talking about issues that aren't covered by a closed meeting exception. Discussing oral legal opinions from legal counsel without a pending lawsuit. If you're going to rely on the attorney-client privilege in closed session, it has to be a written opinion. And I'll explain that in a minute as well. It can't be an oral opinion. It has to be a written opinion from your attorney, whether it's written electronically or a physical opinion that is received. Citing personnel matters as a reason for calling a closed meeting. There are reasons that related to personnel matters that allow you to go into closed session on the board, but they're very, very specific. You just simply can't say going into closed session for personnel matters. You have to identify those specific closed personnel matters, which we'll cover in a minute. Discussing individual administrative contracts in closed session. Closed session exceptions only cover collective bargaining agreements. Okay? If you're discussing an administrator's contract, that has to be discussed in open session, unless your administrators have a union. Okay? If your administrators have organized and they have the Battle Creek Administrators Union, then you could go into closed session and discuss the administrator's collective bargaining agreement. But if you don't have an administrator's bargaining unit and you're looking at individual contracts, those have to be discussed in open session. And then lastly, again, we just talked about you can't make a decision in closed session. So some procedural requirements just before we get into the reasons for going into closed session. You always have to be in open session before going into closed session. So you just can't convene a closed meeting. You have to be in open session first, and then you can go into to closed session. Important to distinguish which ones require a 2/3 roll call vote and which ones require a majority vote to go into closed session. Who decides who can attend that closed session? Regardless of who has requested that closed session, and some of these closed sessions are contingent upon an individual requesting the closed session. Regardless of who requests it, the board determines who's a part of that closed session. So the board may selectively include or exclude certain members from individuals from a closed session. If you have someone attending a closed session that traditionally doesn't attend that closed session, the best way for the board to vote on that is by consent. So the president says, any objection to Principal Smith attending tonight's closed meeting? If no one objects, then by consent, the board has agreed to permit that principal to attend the closed session.
Right, on that one, just for clarification, if we're talking about negotiations or strategy, and there are 4 district administrators that you want, do we need to do that each time?
I think if the past practice and if the general understanding that those folks have always attended the closed session, I would say no. It's just those situations where unique issue that's being addressed and someone that traditionally doesn't attend closed session is going to attend, and then the board should vote on that just to ensure that everyone is comfortable and the board agrees with that person attending the closed session. And then if someone does, if there's an expectation that someone's attending the closed session and all the board members are aware of that and no one objects to it, arguably the board has consented to that as well without a formal declaration by the president. So these are the reasons that allow you to go into closed session as a board. So I have them numbered here 1 through 8. Number 1, so this is the exception that covers all the personnel exceptions. Okay? Complaints against a staff member, possibly disciplining a staff member, or evaluating a staff member. And all these personnel matters can only be covered in a closed session if that staff member has requested the closed session. And you know, discipline not only would cover discipline, but possible, you know, termination as well of that staff member. So the board is going to be considering any of those personnel matters. It has to be requested by that employee, and this would cover board members as well. Possible someone could issue a complaint against a board member, and that can be discussed in closed session as well, as long as that board member has requested the closed session. And this one requires a majority vote. So if the board is going into closed session, for example, to evaluate the superintendent has requested a closed session for the purposes of the board conducting the evaluation in closed session, majority vote by the board, you're in closed session, that's all it takes to go into closed session for the evaluation.
So if Human Resources has a discipline against a teacher,
Yeah.
Brad, we can't go into closed session because we just want to protect Brad. Brad has to ask us.
Has to ask for that close, if it's before the board. Yeah, if it's gonna go before the board, the only way it can be discussed in closed session is if I request a closed session for the board.
Could we offer Brad can we inform him that this will be
We normally do.
discussed?
Yeah.
And then he has the option then to.
Generally, it's kind of in the context, you know, of bringing tenure charges against a teacher. Some of the, you know, minor disciplinary matters involving individuals, you know, may not get to the board level, but yeah, anytime you're bringing tenure charges against a teacher, yeah, that's going to be, some teachers may not request a closed session if they think it's to their advantage, maybe to have those tenure charges discussed in open session, but I think 9 times out of 10, the teacher would request that closed session, because what happens a lot is they give the opportunity for that teacher to resign, and then it's nothing in the public record that tenure charges are going to be brought, and then they can maybe find a job in another school district if they resign before the board formally approves those tenure charges after the closed session. But yeah, that would have to be requested by the staff member. And same thing with the student discipline. You can only go into a closed session for student discipline if requested by the parent. If the student is less than 18, the student is 18, then the student would request that closed session. What comes before the board in student discipline? Is it just expulsions, or nothing comes before the board for?
Nothing.
No? Oh, okay. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's actually a good practice. But what I've found in other districts is that it's difficult sometimes to get a quorum together when you're up against that 10-day time frame, right? Because you don't want anybody to be out of school, you know, up before you're able to give them that full due process hearing before 10 days. And if the board is responsible for expelling students, then yeah, you have to get a quorum present within that 10-day time frame for the board to expel. Yes?
So I don't remember what the situation was, but I remember it coming up once. It has something to do with expulsions.
Reinstatement?
Maybe it was just like maybe that's what it was, like a reinstatement or something like that.
Yeah, so reinstatement must come before the board. So if a student has been
Does
permanently
the student have to
expelled,
request it, or can a district have a process that none of that is an open session?
so it would be up to the parent, again, if my child has been permanently expelled and it's served 80 days, and I'm petitioning for reinstatement, I submit that petition, it's first heard at the committee level, and then the committee makes a recommendation to the board on whether that student should be reinstated or not. It can be discussed in closed session if I request it, but if I want that to be heard in open session, then I wouldn't request a closed session for the board to deliberate on the committee's recommendation for whether that student should be reinstated or not after the 180 days. Number 3, we talked about that already. That is Section 8C of the Open Meetings Act, going into closed session just for negotiating a CBA. Notice number 4 only covers the purchase of property. So if you're selling any district property, that isn't covered, not covered by any closed meeting exception. And then the 4 through 8, I've identified with an asterisk. Those require a 2/3 roll call vote. So if you're going to go into closed session for any of those identified under 4 through 8, you have to have 5 board members present. So you would not be able to go into closed session tonight if you're going to be discussing, maybe consulting with attorney as specific pending litigation. So you're going into closed session, your attorney is going to be calling in, and you're going to be discussing a lawsuit. You couldn't do that without 5 board members present. In that pending litigation exception, you have to identify the litigation when you go into closed session. So that's based on a court case. It's not written into the Open Meetings Act, but how the courts have interpreted that exception. So if it's not the attorney-client privilege exception, but you're going into closed session to discuss a pending case against the school district, you have to identify that case. Number 6, you may apply that if you're going through a superintendent search where the board reviews applications in closed session. If the candidates have requested confidentiality, that's very limited, and that's one where we see a lot of closed session creep, where the board kind of goes beyond what is permitted under that exception and starts maybe narrowing the pool of candidates while they're in closed session. Clearly that isn't permitted under that exception. It's just you're in closed session just to review the applications at that point. And number 7, that's your attorney-client privilege exception, even though it doesn't say it. So under the Freedom of Information Act, a written opinion from your attorney that is protected under the attorney-client privilege is prohibited or is restricted from public disclosure. So if someone makes a FOIA request for a written opinion that you received from your law firm on a specific issue, that's not disclosable under FOIA. And that same document allows you to go into closed session to review it as a board. Okay? That's the attorney-client privilege exception, and that's covered under number 7 there. And then lastly, the most recent closed meeting exception, considering security planning to address existing threats or prevent potential threats. Generally, that refers to a physical threat, but I think you can interpret that to mean cybersecurity as well. If you have a cybersecurity plan that the board wishes to review with the administration, that could be discussed in closed session as well. So any questions on any of those closed meeting exceptions? Yes?
Are there any restrictions on documentation in closed sessions? Like, I take notes, for example.
Yeah.
Are there any?
So the notes you take arguably are closed session minutes. So generally, in most cases, what boards do as a practice, if anyone takes notes, all those notes are gathered up, and you're not permitted to take those notes home with you because the closed meeting minutes are extremely confidential and can't be shared with third parties. So that's why the notes should be retained by your the board clerk, who's ever responsible for keeping the closed session minutes. So let's get on to meeting notice, unless there's any other issues relating or questions relating to closed session. All right. Time. All right, got a little bit of time left. Meeting notices, regular meeting notices. So you set your regular meeting schedule at your organizational meeting. You can either set that the first meeting of your calendar year, which would be January, or the first meeting of July. Either one of those months, you set your regular meeting schedule, and that has to be posted within 10 days of that meeting. If you change that schedule, that requires board action. So this is rescheduling a regular meeting. Okay, that requires board action because you have to provide notice no more than 3 days after the meeting at which that change occurs. So because the board adopted the regular meeting schedule, it can only be changed by board action as well. However, that doesn't necessarily mean canceling a meeting. I think you can cancel a regular meeting without board action, but the difficulty becomes rescheduling it. And what I advise to ensure 100% compliance with the Open Meetings Act is that you schedule a special meeting first, and then you reschedule that regular meeting at that special meeting, and then post the new regular meeting notice within 3 days after that special meeting. Then you're in for full compliance with the act. Another way to kind of avoid that, if you have 2 regular meetings a month, and if you cancel one of those regular meetings, you're good. You don't have to make up that other regular meeting. You just have to have, under the school code, 1 regular meeting per month. Special meetings, this is any meeting outside of that regular meeting schedule. So whether you call it a workshop, study session, work session, retreat, that is a special meeting under the Open Meetings Act. Must be posted 18 hours before that meeting takes place. And the 18 hours is based upon someone having access to it. That's why the best practice is, you post that meeting outside on the, so people can see it through the window. So as soon as that meeting is posted, it's immediately accessible, and someone can't, complain, well, I didn't have 18 hours notice because the building was locked and I couldn't access that notice at some point. And then reconvene meetings, you're able to recess a meeting up to 36 hours without having to repost it. So if you recess a meeting and then reconvene it within 24 hours, you don't have to repost that. Best practice is to try to put as much notice out there when you're going to be reconvening it, location and time, but there isn't a formal process for providing notice in those circumstances. However, if it goes beyond a 36-hour recess, then you have to repost it as a special meeting.
You said must have 1 regular meeting per month.
Yes.
Is that the law?
That is not an Open Meetings Act requirement, that is a school code requirement. That's found in section 11A.
So if School Board A takes July off, that would be not good.
That would not be good.
Okay.
But School Board A wouldn't be alone in doing that.
Okay.
Like we used to do that, and we had just talked about going back to it.
Because you have
We're not.
Yeah.
Yes, because of this in July.
Yeah. That was actually became, that requirement became more well known during the COVID pandemic because there was actually a governmental order that waived that regular meeting requirement where you weren't required to meet on a monthly basis because of the COVID pandemic at that time. But of course that's behind us now, and now that regular meeting requirement still applies. And yeah, even though I cover it in a lot of my classes, but it's kind of buried in the school code, so it's hard to blame a board if they're not aware of it.
So what you're saying is you'd have to post a July meeting, and then nobody shows up.
So that's a good question. Let's say that someone shows up, maybe 2 or 3 board members show up. In that case, I would go forward with the meeting and just cover reports and not taking any action. And that would give you some cover for at least attempting to have that regular meeting. But if you just simply don't schedule a meeting, regular meeting, I've never been aware of a board member getting in trouble for that, but it is a legal requirement in the school code that you're required to have a regular meeting each month. So where do you post your notices? Principal office of the school board and the school district, generally it's the same location. And again, best practice, you post it on the outside window so it is immediately accessible. Special meetings and rescheduled meetings, those have to be not only posted in that location, but on your website as well. Okay, so you're technically not required to post your regular meeting schedule on the website. Most boards do, but you are required to post your your rescheduled regular meetings and your special meetings on your website. And this is more detail on how that must be posted. Either posted on your home page, or if you have a separate page dedicated to board notices, you have a link on your home page that the law describes as a prominent and conspicuous link that describes the purpose for that button or the link that takes someone to the meeting notices. So a few more comments on special meetings. How special meetings are called, not covered under the Open Meetings Act. That is a policy issue or bylaw issue. Most bylaws indicate that the president can call a special meeting, or a special meeting can be called by 2 board members. That kind of brings into play this affidavit of service or call for school board meetings. This isn't required by law, but what it's just documentation that someone called for a special meeting, and then that special meeting was noticed properly under law and was noticed properly under your bylaws. Okay? So if someone were to challenge whether a legitimate special meeting, that affidavit of service or call for a special meeting would provide evidence to a court that, yeah, we legitimately called this meeting and we complied with our bylaws and our Open Meetings Act. You're not required to post your agenda or state on the notice for the special meeting, the purpose of that special meeting. And there are some occasions where maybe you call a special meeting for a specific purpose and the agenda has been sent out. Can you amend that agenda for that special meeting even though it was called for a special purpose? Yes. Agendas aren't covered by the Open Meetings Act. They're essentially a parliamentary tool. Yeah, you can amend an agenda even if it's been publicly shared, publicly posted, or sent to the board. You just want to make sure that you're amending that agenda at the meeting by majority vote of members present. And that can even be done at workshops, study sessions, and retreats, but be sure you're complying with your bylaws if you have a bylaw that says no votes that be taken or business conducted at a board workshop meeting. So a few other points on agendas. I mentioned not required under the Open Meetings Act. However, public hearings require an agenda because you're required to post that agenda for a public hearing on your public hearing notice. So you recently had your budget hearing. That budget hearing notice included the budget hearing agenda. If you ever make any modifications to your bullying or cyberbullying policy, that requires a board hearing before you implement those modifications. So you would have a public hearing and your public hearing notice would require the agenda for that. If you have a sex ed curriculum, you make any changes to your sex ed curriculum, again, that requires a public hearing. And the public hearing notice would require that agenda. If there are any issues come up about the board not appropriately amending an agenda or not following its agenda, that's not an Open Meetings Act issue. That would be a matter of parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order. Someone could claim that you're not following Robert's Rules of Order, but they couldn't claim that you're violating the Open Meetings Act. And in following Robert's Rules of Order, that's not a legal violation that comes with any liability. So under Robert's Rules of Order, kind of a common practice to adopt the agenda. Usually that is one of those votes that's always unanimous, but there have been occasions where boards haven't been able to adopt their agenda because there's such a split board. And if you can't adopt the agenda, that doesn't mean you adjourn the meeting. Where some boards have done, that's the worst thing you could do because you're adjourning the meeting without public comment and you're violating the Open Meetings Act by doing that. Unable to adopt the agenda, that's just a parliamentary procedure matter, and the meeting should continue with an informal agenda rather than a formally adopted agenda. And the purpose for adopting an agenda is kind of setting it. Under Robert's Rules of Order, if you adopt the agenda, it can only be amended by a 2/3 vote after it's adopted. And then also when you adopt the agenda, it gives board members the opportunity to amend it when it's presented to the board for adoption. The agenda also is a tool for the president to have an orderly meeting. If comments stray from the agenda, you always go back to the agenda and say, and if we want to address this issue, the first step that we take is a motion to amend the agenda. We move to amend, get a second, and then you add that item to the agenda, and then it's up for discussion rather than just randomly discussing it because an individual board member wants to discuss it. Again, it's the board's meeting, not an individual board member's meeting, and just because an individual board member wants to discuss something, that doesn't mean that the board has to discuss it. It should go through that formal process of being added to the agenda, whether it be before the meeting or during the meeting. Are there any questions on agendas before we move on to public comment here? All right. So first issue in public comment, or just general participation, public participation at board meetings, is attendance at meetings. So individuals have a right to attend the meeting, attend public meetings under the Open Meetings Act, but it's a limited right. There's a limitation under the Open Meetings Act as well as under the school code. So you can establish reasonable rules and regulations in order to minimize the possibility of having a disruption at your meeting. And you can see the first bullet point there, that's from the Open Meetings Act. Someone can be excluded from a public meeting if they engage in a breach of the peace. And then under the school code, section 1808 indicates that a disorderly person may be ordered to withdraw from a meeting with the assistance of law enforcement after they've been warned, giving them proper notice that their conduct is disrupting the meeting. So you have those two sections in the law that give you authority to remove someone from a meeting if they're disrupting the business of the meeting. What constitutes a breach of the peace? It's pretty significant. Okay? It's not defined in law, but courts have defined it as serious disruptive conduct involving abusive, disorderly, dangerous, aggressive, provocative speech and behaviors tending to threaten or incite violence. That's a pretty high standard. And the case, the most recent case on this involved the board excluding a member of the community from a meeting by simply talking out of turn, okay, and not talking during public comment. And the court recognized in that case the mere violation of a rule relating to public comment cannot automatically constitute a breach of the peace. There has to be more than that. And if a board engages in that type of removal, removing someone just from one slip-up, from without following a public comment rule, you're violating the Open Meetings Act by doing that. So just ensure that you're meeting that high standard identified there in the first bullet point before someone is removed from a public meeting. So public comment kind of differentiated a little bit from attending a public meeting, and you still adopt reasonable rules as a board to facilitate public comment. Those rules must be established and recorded by the school board, and the filter that you use in adopting those rules that has been set by the Attorney General. Rules must be reasonable, flexible, and written in a way that encourage public comment and approved by the board. So that's kind of the lens that you look at these public comment rules through. Are they reasonable, flexible, and written in a way that encourage public comment? And not only do you have to worry about violating the Open Meetings Act when it comes to administering public comment, you have to be concerned about the First Amendment as well. School board meetings are a limited public forum, and because the legislature has indicated that folks have a right to address the board, created a public forum for school board meetings, and that means the First Amendment applies. So you want to make sure you're not infringing upon anyone's free speech rights when they're addressing the board. So example here of one rule that you can enforce to the point of taking away someone's right to address the board, when you have public comment. If you have public comment at the beginning of the meeting and someone shows up late, they've missed their opportunity. Okay? They don't have the ability to say, well, I just couldn't make it here in time, traffic was bad, I'd worked over, whatever. No, you have your public comment at a set time, and if someone misses it, according to this case, they have to come back to the next meeting and address the board at that point. And one of the arguments that the plaintiff made in this case was, well, I didn't know when public comment was. The board didn't post their agenda, and this case also provides the authority that you're not required to post your agendas. You're not required to have an agenda, so it definitely doesn't have to be posted under the Open Meetings Act. Length of comment. This is one of the rules that you can adopt, limiting individual speakers' times. Again, you want to encourage public comment, so limiting time to a minute probably wouldn't be encouraging public comment. I advise that you don't go less than 3 minutes, okay? Some boards will start out with 5 and then maybe go down to 3 if you have a large group that is looking at addressing the board. Definitely enforce the time limit consistently, because once you give someone an extra 30 seconds and then the next person you don't, they're gonna say, well, you know, that person was speaking positively of the board and of the school district. I was criticizing the district and you cut me off right at 3 minutes. That shows you're discriminating against me based on my viewpoint. And yeah, that would be arguably a First Amendment claim if you know someone's treated differently based upon their viewpoint, you know, in a public meeting like that. Don't have to permit sharing of time. This has happened in other districts where someone uses their whole 3 minutes and they're stopped during public comment, and then someone from the audience says, I give that person my 3 minutes so they can continue. You don't have to share that. That is something that the Open Meetings Act doesn't say you have to permit. And as far as total time for public comment, you want to make sure everyone had the opportunity to address the board. So you couldn't set in your agenda, 30 minutes for public comment, and then once you get to the 30 minutes, say we're done, and you still have 5 people that wish to address the board. You have to go beyond that, and that's what this sample public comment rule indicates. You could start out limiting it to 1/2 hour, but the board is going to extend that time frame so that no one's right to address the board will be denied. And this is an example also of starting at 5 minutes and then going down to 3 when you have so many people that wish to address the board that that time frame won't accommodate the full 5 minutes. So we're going to go down to 3 minutes, or we'll waive the 1/2 hour time limit, or we'll do both, go down to 3 and waive the 1/2 hour time limit so everyone has the opportunity to address the board. You guys use public comment forms? People have to sign up. That's the best practice. I advise that, because to me that limits folks from piling on when it comes to public comment. And these public comment forms have been upheld both by the Attorney General and the Court of Appeals. 2 unanswered questions though, as far as when the forms must be submitted under the Open Meetings Act. Most districts, most boards will say you have to submit them before public comment starts, before you come to that time on the agenda, or the forms must be submitted prior to the meeting being called to order. That would be fine as well. And you could probably even take it out a little further. I'm aware of one district that says you have to submit the forms 2 hours before the meeting's called to order. I probably wouldn't go too much further than that, because at some point someone's going to question that practice, and then it may not be as seen as encouraging public comment if you require forms to be submitted maybe like 24 hours before the meeting's called to order. And what information can you require on that public comment form? I think just indicating someone wishes to address the board. I don't think you can go beyond that, to be honest with you. A non-resident can address your school board, so there's no reason to require them to put their address on the public comment form. You can't require them to indicate what they're going to talk about. Now you can ask them to voluntarily share all this information, particularly if they wish to have some follow-up based on their public comments. But if someone doesn't give their address, definitely they should not be denied to the opportunity to address the board based on not putting that information down on their form. So large groups, there's some issues that come up. I mentioned you can't limit the right to address the board to residents of the district. Anyone can address the board. You can request a large group to designate a spokesperson if the group wishes to address the same issue. If you have other items that the board wishes to get to prior to completing public comment, you can table public comment until later in the meeting. That's always a permissible action by the board. And then you can always recess the meeting at the beginning, middle, or end of the meeting. If you say public comment until the end of the meeting, and then maybe you're at 11 o'clock at night and you still have 10 people that wish to address the board, you can always recess that meeting until the next day at some point. You just don't go over 36 hours, and you have to repost it with 18 hours notice But if you're less than 36 hours with recessing that meeting, that would be permissible under the Open Meetings Act. And we'd already talked about removing disruptive and unruly individuals from your meetings. So what about complaints? Someone comes to the board meeting, starts taking a teacher to task or an administrator to task. Could you adopt this policy and enforce it? A board shall not permit complaints against school personnel to be expressed at a public meeting. Such concerns shall be submitted in writing to the board and eventually aired in an open or closed session according to the wish of the persons involved. Is that enforceable under the Open Meetings Act or the First Amendment? Well, based upon a case that actually originated here in Battle Creek, it involved the city of Battle Creek, it was determined that in that case someone could make a public complaint against the Battle Creek police chief at a public meeting. And when this happened, this person was actually taken out of the meeting when they continued with their complaint after they were told by the chair not to air that in a public meeting. This person, Galt, sued, claiming that violated First Amendment rights by not being able to share a matter of public concern at a board meeting, and the court agreed in that case. So based on this case, folks have a right to bring up complaints at a public meeting. It has to be a matter of public concern, meaning it's related to someone's duties and responsibilities as a staff member. Okay? It can't be a personal attack against someone that has nothing to do with their district responsibilities. But if it's related to how they administer or how they teach, that's fair game in a public meeting based upon that court case. Now you can still encourage folks to go through the proper channels. So if they're coming to the board meeting to complain about the teacher and they haven't gone through the administration first, you can gently try to point them in that direction. And that's what this language does. You can either put this on your agenda in the back or announce it during, if you have a situation where you believe you're going to be hearing complaints about a particular individual. That first paragraph kind of gets into protecting their due process and going through the proper channels, having them go through the administration first rather than bring it to the board. And the second paragraph gets into you may be subjecting yourself to liability if you defame someone at a public meeting. And you better be sure that this complaint is a legitimate complaint, and if it's not, the individual can come back and sue you for defamation. So that second paragraph is kind of a warning in that regard. Personal attacks, as I mentioned, anything not related to someone's duties and responsibilities as a school staff member, that's what you can rule out of order. Okay, but that's a difficult call at times. And if I'm advising a board president, I'm saying err on the side of allowing a complaint. Okay, even if it's remotely related to someone's responsibilities as a staff member. You see that last statement there from an Attorney General opinion. Purpose of a board meeting is to discuss public business, not deal with individual personalities. So that means an individual attacking someone is based upon a conflict that individual has with that individual, not related to the individual's duties and responsibilities as a staff member. And you can't limit public comment just to agenda items. You could do that if you have two opportunities for public comment. So one first opportunity could limit to agenda items, second opportunity, anything within the jurisdiction of the board. And then public comment minutes, sometimes that's difficult as far as how you document individuals who address the board. You don't have to really put much information in there. You see the second bullet point, you could say public comment, audience participation, no action taken. That would be legally sufficient. You don't have to put much more in your minutes than that. However, it's a board decision. Sometimes you may get some community pushback if you don't identify who addressed the board during public comment or try to paraphrase or summarize what they said. So that's an issue that if it becomes something of a point of conflict of what should be included in the minutes, that should be up for board discussion, and the board ultimately decides how much will be included in its minutes when it comes to public comment, and then lastly, enforcement and penalties. So when a board crosses the line and fails to comply with the Open Meetings Act, 3 actions that could be taken. First one, civil liabilities. Anyone can sue a school board for violating the Open Meetings Act. They just have to show that the board violated the act. They have to prove that there was intent behind in violating it, and there will be, personal liability. Sometimes that may be covered by a district's insurance liability policy. Sometimes it may not be. It depends upon how that policy is written. But the big penalty there is the other side's attorney's fees. So when a board has been found to be in violation of the Open Meetings Act, $500 is not much of a penalty. However, paying the other side's attorney's fees, which could go over 6 figures, is more of a penalty in that regard. Criminal penalties, yes, someone can be criminally prosecuted for violating OMA. I've been with MASB 28 years. Never have heard of anyone being criminally prosecuted. I shared with you the investigation earlier about individual or boards creating a constructive quorum by having their tag team meeting. Yeah, there has to be intent there. And in that case, the prosecutor did not find intent, so did not bring charges after conducting the investigation of whether there was a violation. Now, someone could have still sued those board members in civil court for violating OMA, but when the prosecutor has to determine that there's a case there in order for someone to be charged. And then lastly, you can have your decision invalidated. So if a decision is made at a meeting and there wasn't full compliance with the Open Meetings Act at that meeting, someone can pursue a court order to have that decision invalidated based upon the board not complying with the act in conducting its meeting. So that's it for the presentation. Again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or you can email or call me. Yeah, Charlie.
So earlier you said we don't have to, but we can, like if I talk for public comment for 3 minutes, and then Nathan gets up and says he gives his 3 minutes to me, we can say yes or no on that. Does the board say yes or no at that time, or do we have to pre-do it?
I would do that by consent. So if someone wants to share their 3 minutes, what you could do is ask the other board members, is there any objection to allowing another community member to share their 3 minutes with this individual? If no one objects, then by consent, the board has agreed to allow the sharing of time in that situation.
Would these patient then be that it's consistent? So if someone else then wants to share 3 minutes, and we say, actually, no, we have objection with that one.
Okay.
Could that be construed as discriminatory?
So if you allowed someone to share and then you didn't allow someone else to? Yeah, that could be problematic.
Like you'd be
You want to be consistent with your decisions. Yeah. And I've seen in a lot of bylaws where it explicitly states that time may not be shared during public comment.
I feel like at one time throughout my 6 years we've had it once, but but we let it happen, so yeah. I don't know.
I wanted to go back to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
Should have wrote it down. Public comment.
Yeah.
I've only had this happen one time since I've been here, and I shut them down. I was actually sitting over there. Are you saying that someone can come in here at public comment and talk about the red light that doesn't work 3 blocks away, that has nothing to do with business, and go on and on?
No, I would, yeah. That would be a personal attack. It has nothing to do with.
Yes, it has nothing to do.
Yeah.
We can't shut them down.
You can restrict that.
Okay, I misunderstood what you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be a personal attack, and that can be restricted.
Okay. And we don't have to sit here and listen to someone attack an individual.
Yeah, as long as it's not related to their duties and responsibilities as a teacher. So the example that I like to give that it is a difficult one to address is, let's say you have a teacher that is arrested and convicted for DUI. not happened on school property, wasn't at a school activity.
Right.
It was just during the summer, and then it comes out in the news that this individual was arrested, convicted of DUI. Is that a personal attack if someone comes to a meeting and says, that person's a horrible role model for our kids? The person should be, not terminated, at least disciplined. But is that related to their duties and responsibilities as a staff member? Arguably, no. But I think someone could make the argument that based on the individual being a role model for kids as a teacher, as a coach, that it would be fair game at a public meeting. So that's one I struggle with. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, you do have my contact information on the first slide there. Please don't hesitate to reach out with a phone call or email. If it was kind of just an overview tonight, lots of other Open Meetings Act issues I didn't cover, but yeah, reach out if you have any questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to jump back to the first page to approve the agenda. I will entertain a motion. Yes, trustee?
Approve the agenda.
Support.
It's been moved by trustee Hoagland Jackson, supported by trustee Johnson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say yes. Yes. All opposed say no. Motion passes. Okay, now that we have the quorum, we're going to go through A through G again. So we'll start with. I'm just kidding. I was seeing who was going to
Be my
Just kidding. Do we have any public comments? Okay, thank you. Moving on to new business. I will entertain a motion. Right. Yes.
I move that we approve the Dudley Early Childhood Center Play Area Surfacing Project. Funded by the BCPS.
Support.
It's been moved by trustee Hoagland Jackson, supported by trustee McClenny. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say yes. Yes. All opposed say no. Motion passes. Moving on to B, I'll entertain a motion. Yes.
I move that we approve the Bullseye Instructional Support Platform for an amount up to $50,000 to be funded by the WKKF.
Any support?
Support.
It's been moved by trustee Hoagland Jackson, supported by trustee McClenny. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say yes. Yes. All opposed say no. Motion passes. Superintendent comments.
Yes, I just want to remind everybody to read this summer. There is a lot happening, lots of different activities happening around the city. But most importantly, we want to make sure that all of our students are reading on a regular basis and participating with Willard Library, who has lots of activities going on. We will see you on the first day of school, August 20th.
Thank you so much. Board member comments. Well, I have a few. Just for the board members, this Thursday, I'm meeting the other three presidents from the three districts to hopefully finalize our speaker for our joint board meeting in September for the topic AI. So I'll keep you guys updated with that. A reminder to the community, this Friday is the Battle Creek Pride Parade. And once again, we are the only district that signed up out in our city to participate. We are number 16, so if anyone wants to walk with Battle Creek Public Schools, lineup is on Van Buren Street by the Cool Family Center, and you just look for the BCPS shirts. We'll be there. The start time is 7 p.m., and that is this Friday for the Pride Parade. Also, I want to send my condolences to Coach Mark White's family. I did see there was a celebration of life for him Saturday, July 26th from 12 to 4 at the Battle Creek Central Fieldhouse. And everyone is welcome to come. So if you have the opportunity, please join us for that celebration. And then last, on a personal note, I want to thank everyone who reached out to me for my about my brother's passing. It was really nice to know that I have family here in Battle Creek Public Schools, and it really meant a lot to me. So with that being said, great things are happening in Battle Creek Public Schools. Meeting adjourned.